Thank you. Thank you for joining us at the world-famous Quantico Cyber Hub. Appreciate you being here today. I'm Scott Spencer from Insight Public Sector. As I think we all know, digital transformation and IT modernization are being embraced throughout government and across the private sector. And why is that? Well, organizations are seeking to enable new capabilities, stand up new applications, improve performance, increase resiliency, improve agility, all at lower cost and with improved performance along the way. And to help organizations achieve those goals, there are no technologies that are more important than cloud computing and data management. And today we're lucky to have with us the two companies that are really leading in that space, AWS, what they're doing in cloud computing, and NetApp for data management. So again, thank you for joining us today. I think you'll get a lot out of the presentations this morning. We've got some really top-notch speakers here with us today. Nick Goose from AWS will kick it off, followed by Jeff Herron from NetApp. Between those two, we'll take a lunch break, and then after the NetApp presentation, we'll follow it up with a demo of integration, a capability that takes the power of AWS and combines it with the power of NetApp's ONTAP system. And then we'll wrap it up with a presentation from Mike Till from Insight. So with that, let me turn it over to Nick.
Thanks, Spencer. Good morning, or Scott, sorry. Call you by your last name.
Either one works.
So like he said, lots going on in the public sector space, digital transformation, how do we become more agile, how do we increase productivity? The big one is always cost reduction, but there's benefits beyond cost reduction, right? Looking at going global quickly, IoT, AI, ML, data center consolidations, and outsourcing, and end-of-lifing hardware and software, right? These are all part of what you can do in the different business drivers, bringing people to the cloud and going to a platform like AWS. So again, benefits, right? Going back to the cost savings, 31% cost savings over time, 62% more efficient IT infrastructure teams, and increasing agility. Again, just going back to helping companies move quicker, helping public sector move quicker, do more innovative things for their customers and their end customers, right? And AWS is a platform that can help do that, along with our partners like Insight and companies like NetApp as well. So I'm sure everybody has seen a little bit of a flavor of AWS and the art of the possible. But again, we go back to experience-based acceleration with AWS and helping folks move to the cloud. And it's really in a framework of 3 different motions that our partners are all up to speed on as well. Insight's doing a lot of these things, doing a great job at it. But we have an assess phase, a mobilize phase, and a migrate and modernize phase. And within these different phases, there are AWS-specific tools, but then our partners also have their own tooling and their own processes around doing this and helping customers get to the cloud, and there's certain expertises in doing that. Just a couple of quick things. In the assess phase, right, we have AWS Migration Evaluator, where you're building the use case, you're building and understanding what are the workloads that you currently have today, and which workloads do you want to move to the cloud going into the future. Moving into the mobilize phase, right? Mobilize phase, this is discovery, planning, landing zone, skill centers of excellence. What do your teams look like? Who do you have to be able to bring this to the clouds? Who are you partnering with to be able to mobilize that experience and move those workloads to the clouds? And then finally, once you're there, right, how do you continue to iterate? How do you make things better? How do you do more in the cloud and do it quicker in the last phase? And we have the AWS Application Migration Service, and I'll touch on each one of these tools just in a little bit more depth as we move forward. In the assess phase, again, going back to it, we're looking at your current IT snapshot. Now, this is something that Insight can do and will do, right? We'll look at the asset inventories, application configuration, performance information, CMDB. You can use AWS Migration Evaluator, build that business use case, right? Moving from the business use case, looking at the readiness assessment. What are the teams, again, going back to what teams do you have, Cloud Center of Excellence? What are you doing currently that is looking at the picture of how ready you are to move these workloads to the clouds, and what can you do to get there? And then the last piece is tracking that whole movement, tracking what you're doing from beginning to end, and being able to see that migration and that workload come into the cloud, depending on what it is that you're moving and how you're moving it, right? Hopping into the migration evaluator, inventory discovery. It's an agentless collector inside of one of the tools that we have, the migration evaluator, right? And it looks at a variety of different things. It can be VMware, hypervisors, bare metal, SQL servers. It supports automatic upload of daily inventory and utilization, and it supports data redaction through manual Excel uploads, exports, and this can all be done via the AWS Management Console, or there's some manual processes that can happen as well. But we can communicate with each vSphere virtual appliance, communicate with each hypervisor host, communicates with server directly through WMI, SNMP, and SQL Server communicate through T-SQL, so on and so forth. Go ahead. In the mobilize phase. So looking at the mobilize phase, right, again, we've got our current IT snapshot. We understand what asset inventory is. We're looking at the workloads. We know what we're going to move from the cloud, or move from on-premises to the cloud. And now we want to discover and organize that data. Right, we want to build out and import this information, and this AWS Migration Hub in this phase allows you to have a network visualization and actually see your servers or your workloads, applications, and then provide and work through what strategy is going to be used. That is the 7 R's, right? The refactor, replatform, and rehosting. What is going to work best for this workload and the strategy that we need to move through going forward. And again, Insight, and folks like Insight and NetApp can help with this strategy and building out this organized data moving forward into the cloud. Going into those 7 different strategies, right? I won't beat this one to death because I'm sure we've all heard the 7 R's, but the rehosting, the relocating, replatforming, refactoring, repurchasing, or retiring, and knowing when to do which one of these, right? So, relocating, looking at containers, VMware Cloud, rehosting, lift and shift, NetApp solutions, Amazon FSx on NetApp on tap, and determining, if we're rehosting, organizations looking to expedite to the cloud with smaller costs while looking to eventually add further changes, relocating, right, mainly suitable for applications running VMware, local Kubernetes, so on and so forth, replatforming, organizations considering a move to the cloud, but concerns about risk involved in comprehensive migration of legacy applications, refactoring, best for complex workloads, right? High usability, strong business case for performance increases, so on and so forth. And then retiring and retaining, looking at workloads, is this something that we end of life? Is it something that we retain? And retention is, hey, do we need to keep this for compliance or security reasons on premises versus moving it to the cloud or moving to a hybrid structure, right? And then this is our other favorite, is looking at the migration journey, right? Starting from, we're all on premises currently, and how do we become more innovative, and how do we increase the speed and velocity of what we're doing in the cloud for our end customers in the public sector, whether it's right-sizing hardware, open sourcing, not necessarily for public sector, but managed service, containers, serverless, and being able to do these things quicker at a fraction of the cost, pumping back those cost savings into more innovative solutions for your end customers. And then the last phase, the migrate and modernize phase, again, touching on the tool, the application migration service. And starting with rehost, touching on that, is a fast, cost, and effective, minimally disruptive way to move to the cloud. And it's highly automated lift and shift solution that simplifies and expedites migrating applications to AWS, right? It allows companies to do this lift and shift. It gives iterative improvements, migrating the applications, and access the full range of AWS capabilities while you're going through the migration service. And this is all in concert with Insight and NetApp and those folks, and being able to deliver this migration. And it's all based on, again, the experience-based acceleration and what AWS, what Insight, and these folks have experience in doing and helping customers move to the cloud, especially in the public sector. Again, wide platform support, so virtually any application, virtually, not everything, but virtually any database, and source infrastructure. And going on to the next slide, kind of the reason why we're all here today, and to learn a little bit more about, go ahead on the next one. is Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. And it's a full-featured ONTAP as a native AWS managed service. It's a complete NetApp ONTAP file system. I'm not going to steal the thunder of the NetApp folks. I'll let them go into more detail as we move on through the presentations today. But it can run applications on AWS with all the benefits of ONTAP, app admin, respond quickly, confidently to changing business needs, storage admin. Build applications faster, so with the app dev side of things, combining infrastructure as code, flexible compute bursting, and FSx ONTAP storage. And then you can do more with your data. With FSx ONTAP, your data is immediately available to limitless AWS compute resources and a broad set of integrated AWS services as well. And FSx ONTAP also supports industry standard protocols, SMB, NFS, iSCSI, enabling new levels of collaboration for your data by Windows and Linux and any Mac OS-based user applications that require shared storage. So it's a brilliant service and a brilliant offering that we have. And hopefully I didn't bore you guys to death too much. But we have some other folks, Insight team and the NetApp team, that are going to go into more detail. I think now they're going to allow you guys to grab some lunch or get ready for lunch. But any further questions, I'll make sure that everybody has my information as well from the AWS side of things. And happy to pass it on to the next folks.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, talking about public sector, talking about, my name's Frank. I'm not the foundation, I'm with X-Corp. But the question I have is, when you survey the federal landscape today, there is a lot of hype on cloud computing, obviously. A lot of legacy applications that are sitting, a lot of investment in ongoing maintenance, is continuing to evolve.
Sure.
And the question is, moving from on-prem to a hybrid cloud to a full cloud, what is that propensity? What does it look like? What's the cost model look like?
Sure.
And you went through a lot of those application providers in there.
Yep.
All right, and they're running practically all of them.
Yep. Yeah.
So going back to your inventory and assessment, what's the starting point? What's the midpoint and the end point? And then what does that economically look like for the government? Because it's a whole acquisition. It's a change, right?
Right. Yep. And the whole procurement process.
It's a big change.
Sure. Right? Sure. Yeah. So starting from the beginning, right? So you can do this assessment. Look at what you have for the inventory side of things. With that, what I don't go into here is there's tons of programs with AWS, tons of funding programs, and Insight also has access to some of these as a partner of AWS. So we can take a look at, okay, what do you have? What are the different operating systems? What do you own? What hardware do you already have from a procurement perspective? What can we do to alleviate some of that cost? Because there's a cost to moving to the cloud. It's not free. Anybody that tells you it's free, snake oil salesman. It's not true. But there are programs that we have, that AWS has, that Insight has, through us as partners to help offset that cost. So let's take a look at it. Let's look at what your hardware is. Now let's put together, what is the scope? All right, what is it going to take to actually move? We're going to start with this smaller workload. Maybe it's not a huge business priority. It's some smaller environment that we're not doing a ton on. Let's make a use case for that, get some funding for that, build out what a proof of concept is to actually migrate that workload. Doesn't matter what what it actually is, the operating system or whatever it is that you're doing. Let's move through that motion, and then once we have that, we have a proof of concept. We know how it's going to work for that workload or that on-premises database or data center that you have, and use it as a use case for bigger and larger investments of moving to the cloud. And then on that, there are more programs and more fundings to help move those larger workloads. Does it make sense? Is there going to be an efficiency gain? Is there going to be innovation gains there? Is there going to be agility gains there and digital transformation gains there?
So in my mindset, it's simply, right, to paraphrase what you just said,
yep.
It's color of money. One's cap, one's op, one's
yes.
modernization dollars. Right?
Yep.
And they're all three different buckets.
Sure.
And then how do you assess, whatever the application transfer is, that all kind of goes together. But it sounds like you've got the tools and the competencies to go
Correct.
through that process.
In that mobilization phase, we actually have a program called MAP, which basically lays out what's that black box of where these procurement dollars need to come from, which buckets are we using, and how can we help the end customer with what they're working on either the contract vehicles or whatever pools of funding that they have, with an insight to help make that all flow through easily. But that's an hour-long conversation. But yes, there's tools inside, and AWS has those available to go through any migration.
Very helpful. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah,
Appreciate
no
it.
problem.
Any other questions? Another question for you.
Sure.
I mean, it's been impressive to watch the growth of the portfolio of AWS's services. It's almost impossible to keep track of.
200 plus and growing, something like that?
It started out with what, EC2
Right.
and S3, and
Right.
and it's expanded exponentially from there. Can you talk about what you're seeing in public sector in terms of, obviously EC2 and S3 continues to expand. Where else are you seeing a lot of growth and adoption within public sector in particular, across that broad portfolio of services?
Yeah, well, not to toot the horn of the demonstrations here today, but NetApp, I mean, FSx on Amazon NetApp is a large one. But Gen AI, I mean, is the kind of the buzzword today, right? And how can we use those services to increase what we're doing? Is it a 911 operating system? Is it, some of these out-of-box thinking that you can do with Gen AI, and some of the power behind that is one of the biggest areas that most public sector companies are talking about us today. And how do you get access to something like AWS Bedrock? How do you start playing around in that environment? What are we doing with the data that we currently have? How can we utilize that data, provide more insights on the back end, and help our not workloads only be better, but how do we utilize that data to the best that we have, and how can we create more exciting, innovative opportunities within public sector. So Bedrock is probably the biggest one and the most interest that we have from most folks, in being able to utilize that and the opportunities there.
Yeah, Chris Wild here. I am the foundation. The overall goal with the FSx on NetApp ONTAP is to allow existing on-prem NetApp users to lift and shift, or is it just giving NetApp capabilities to your otherwise cloud-native file store? Like, what's the overall goal of it?
Sure. We can get into more detail with the other folks, but from a high level, right, can you do both? Yeah. I mean, it gives you, so the FSx NetApp ONTAP for FSxN, it gives you this on the AWS platform, so it opens up the AWS services for your workloads and what you guys are doing from on-premises, lift and shift to the cloud, and it gives you access to the more AWS native services as well on top of that. Yep. Cool.
Are there similar offerings on the other cloud providers, such as Google and Azure?
That is a great question.
What?
Right. No, it's a great question. It's one we get, and we always want to make AWS play against Google and Azure, right? So I can't speak directly to what those folks are doing. Do they have solutions? Yes. Do they have abilities to do some of these things? Yes. I can't go into details on it because I'm not Azure or Google, but they do, yeah. All right, thank you. Why do we win? I guess one of the biggest things, and like what I said going before, experience-based acceleration. So we've gone through it, and our partner ecosystem. So folks that are doing this and working with government customers on a day-to-day basis, they know what you need, they know how to get you there, and they have access to our teams as well for funding to help shift that cost and to help that migration, and help get access to those tools.
Nick, I mean, obviously the huge growth in AWS's business, right? I mean, it's, just super impressive. Within the federal government or public sector at large, what are you still seeing as some of the challenges that are, that are still holding back some organizations for, moving more
capabilities to the cloud?
Sure. I think it goes back to even what you said, right, is we have all this hardware. We've procured it. We have been maintaining it. We have teams maintaining this hardware. So how do we have that conversation around moving to the cloud and which workloads we move first, right? And having those conversations. How do we build the team around that? What does that flow look like? And I think that the biggest challenge there, right, is really building out a cloud center of excellence, and like, what does cloud mean for those groups, and what does it mean for your teams? How do we upskill? How do we enable? And how do we provide you access to proof of concepts, to demos, to help the team see what we can do not only on-premises, but moving to the cloud, and what these services can do for those environments, looking at digital transformation and modernization, like with those workloads.
You mentioned in the sales cycle that typically you've seen success going after smaller, kind of low-hanging fruit type things first. What are some examples of the ones you've seen that the government was willing to, okay, let's do this as a trial run, and we'll move on to the bigger stuff from there if it works well?
Sure. Sure. I mean, the typical ones are low-hanging fruit, small database moves, small data. So, like, we're working on a couple of proof of concepts now with some clients where it's just purely small database moves. Like, let's utilize S3 for some of the storage. So we're going to move some of the data that we have using a snowball device, and let's show you what that concept of moving small storage from here to a lower cost storage facility like S3.
Okay.
So that's kind of a low-hanging fruit one for sure.
Your costing model, right, or your pricing, I shouldn't say costing. Pricing,
Sure.
Pricing model for someone else, but I'm just thinking here, price per gig, price per meg, gig, peta, right? When you start getting into the larger applications and workloads, and then you get into CPU cycles, and then you get into networking cycles and all that. I mean, I'm sure you do. You have a pricing model that, costing and pricing model, that play all that out?
Yes. Yep. So within AWS and that migration evaluator, it was formerly TSO Logic, but you can actually, there's a calculators, and you can go in and we can get into pretty nitty-gritty detail and actually cost all those different items out. So you can see, similar to like what we're doing on premises, here's what that cost would look like in the cloud, and based on your current metrics and what you're seeing from those CPU cycles, from data transfer, some egress, all that.
Coming fresh out of the Marine Corps, when we do our cost modeling for a shift to cloud or any IT modernization, part of it is training our Marines on how to use it. So since we've all cut our teeth on NetApp, Filer, stand-up SIP shares, we don't have to reteach. Now they're doing it in another cloud.
Sure.
That's a plan factor for us.
Nick, I know it was just recently announced, but Snowblade,
I haven't gotten to have any fun with it. I'm not too familiar with it, unfortunately, but I can get more documentation and everything else for everybody as well. But
in fact, if you could get one that we could.
Right, bring it here and everybody can start playing with it. Exactly. Yeah. Hey, that might be something we.
Anytime you want to come up and play.
Yes, and we can bring folks in. Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely something that we probably can do and probably should do for sure. Cool. Thank you guys so much.
All right, afternoon. I think it's afternoon there, not quite morning. So yeah, Jeff Aaron, token technical guy, solutions architect for specifically FSXN only. We're going to talk about FSX for NetApp ONTAP, and we'll get into a little bit of the technical weeds with it if you would like. But for starters, we're going to talk about what it is. FSX for NetApp ONTAP is just like Cloud Volumes ONTAP, a full-featured instance of ONTAP. The difference between the two is that it's managed and maintained by AWS. Right, so AWS does the care and feeding of the storage infrastructure. They do the day-to-day operation. They do the patches. They do the hot fixes. They do the upgrades. All of those things that you would normally have in your infrastructure team is taken care of on your FSXN implementation. So pros and cons with every decision, right? FSXN managed service, that's a positive thing. FSXN managed service, that can be a negative thing. And here's why. You guys have a relatively large ONTAP presence on premises. You can snap mirror between your on-premises estate and your FSXN instances. FSX for NetApp ONTAP shortened to FSXN, if that's okay. The upgrade cycle that AWS uses is pretty aggressive. So they're already shipping new instances of FSXN are being deployed with 9.13. Right, since it's being deployed with 9.13, and the stated line in the sand for a supported replication relationship is 2 major releases, you would want to have your on-premises estate at 9.11. That sometimes pushes operations in an on-premises infrastructure to do things that they don't normally do from an upgrade perspective. Empirically speaking, that's a line in the sand, that two release. There is a matrix on the support site that would give you better visibility into that. And the support for a supported relationship between an FSXN instance and an on-premises instance is quite a bit wider than 2 at the moment. I expect that will tighten up over time. So how do we integrate with the tooling inside of your, FSX or ONTAP instances? Some of the key integrations that we have with the environment with AWS is going to be your EC2 instances, of course. As you start to containerize the implementations, things like EKS or Red Hat OpenShift. You're going to have, some of the services around visibility or with CloudWatch, automation with cloud formations, some of those sorts of things. All of that is natively in tune with the FSXN because, again, it is a first-party service. From a NetApp perspective, when we talk about what kind of NetApp cloud tools are available in the environment, this one didn't transfer too well, but we have up in the corner, the left side snap mirror is supported. So one of the only first-party services that gives you snap mirror capabilities, not only to on-premises ONTAP, but to other instances of Cloud Volumes ONTAP, to other regions of FSXN implementations, fully supported throughout that entire environment, including, this is the AWS's stance, including the ability to replicate from an FSXN instance to a Cloud Volumes ONTAP instance in another hyperscaler, assuming the network can handle that. Okay. So some interesting things that you can do around creating that multi-hybrid cloud environment from an on-premises estate to an FSXN estate, transitioning from CVO potentially to a first-party service. On the right side, where you see the $sign, that's supposed to represent cloud tiering. Cloud tiering gives us the ability to take better advantage of those older, colder blocks of data. As they become less relevant to the business, they will slide down to an S3 tier. So by default, FSXN has 2 tiers assigned to it, an SSD tier and a capacity pool tier. That capacity pool tier is an S3 bucket. So when we talk about the enterprise capability of an environment and some of those things that you have come to expect out of an on-premises storage platform, FSXN supports that, right? So it gives us the ability to have cloud-native storage with enterprise features. So if we look down, starting in the access protocol, just like ONTAP on-premises, FSXN is a multi-protocol environment. So you can do NFS, you can do SMB, you can do block with iSCSI. Not only is it multi-protocol, but it's multi-version of multi-protocol. All right, so I can have that NFS v3 or v4 implementation. I can have that SMB, CA share and v3 instance, et cetera. So if I have a more performant NFS mount point requirement, I can mount it as an NFS v3. If I have a more audit requirement of that NFS mount point, I can mount that as an NFS v4, for example. So I can take advantage of that multi-protocol in the environment pretty effectively. Moving up, it does support the ONTAP CLI, and it does support the API for ONTAP. Supports things like quotas and flex vols and flex groups, et cetera. And so you can take advantage of having quotas and any kind of run books that you have already created for within the ONTAP CLI, et cetera. On the performance and scalability side, we finally have a cloud storage provider that gives this cloud storage implementation that provides consistency of storage performance on that. I can do 160 plus thousand IOPS published on the high end at 1 millisecond latency to the storage. I can have up to 4 gigabytes of throughput, and I can scale that out to multi-petabytes, right? So a single file system, by the way, file system is analogous to a controller pair in your on-premises implementation. A file system single file system go out to about 2 petabytes currently, okay? We'll support the caching and the cloning of the environment. Snap, Flex Cache, and Flex Clones are both supported with FSXN. So if I have remote facilities, remote users that needed to have better, more performant implementation, I can take advantage of cached volumes. FSXN can be both the source and the destination for a Flex Cache volume. So that gives me some flexibility in those remote implementations. From an availability and resiliency perspective, the default deployment method for FSXN is multi-availability zone HA, okay? So if I wanted to do that as a single availability zone, I can. It is still a single availability zone HA implementation. So both implementation methods are HA in nature. We'll get into what the multi-AZ gives us when we get to the architecture slide. Snapshot, snap restore, snap mirror, snap lock, snap clones, all of the snap functionality that you've come to use in your on-premises ONTAP estate is available to you with FSXN, including the implementation of snap lock, both enterprise and about a month and a half ago compliance. So FSXN gives you the only storage platform in a hyperscaler, full stop, that gives you compliance on the snap lock. So if I wanted to make that an immutable copy for 30 years, I could do that. Be careful what you wish for with snap lock compliance, but it is available and it is a really good feature that you can use for immutability of access. From a security compliance perspective, it'll integrate with your Active Directory. If you extend your Active Directory into your AWS VPC, which with something like an ADFS or AWS AD, it can take advantage of that. We can scale out to 24 SVMs. So if you wanted to have isolation of protocol or departmental separation with an SVM, you can do that. It will do inline virus scanning, just like your on-premises estate. It has the same F-policy audit capabilities, so you can grab the F-policy logs if you enable F-policy with something like a Varonis or something like that. And you can take advantage of that from a visibility and or virus scanning perspective. Obviously, the recommendation is to put an engine inside of the VPC, not have it traverse all the way back down to your on-premises estate to do the virus scans and things like that. And then for me, the biggest part of the value prop for FSXN is the realization of storage efficiencies. So those things that you've come to expect in the environment in your on-premises estate for the last 15 years are finally there for you again in your cloud storage world. Things like deduplication and compression, with NetApp post-process compaction, thin provisioning, and we talked loosely about data tiering. the ability to move those older, colder blocks of data from a performant SSD tier to a less performant but highly available capacity pool. This does present a challenge for you operationally, okay? And here's the challenge that the storage efficiency realization provides you. In your on-premises world, if somebody comes to you and said, I need a 2 terabyte volume, and you provide, you don't really think about it. You just provide them a 2 terabyte volume. The volume's then provisioned. It gets then provisioned to 500 gig or something like that, because that's what they're actually consuming, and away you go. If they need more, they get a little bit more provisioned, and you don't have to interact with that. Okay. If you do that same methodology in a cloud world, and it doesn't matter if it's FSxN or EFS or EBS or Azure Managed Disks or what have you, if you allocate a 2 terabyte volume on a 500 gig used, your bill for that is for a 2 terabyte volume, even though you're only consuming 500 gig. So from an operational perspective, because I'm exposing efficiencies, deduplication, compression, thin provisioning, post-process compaction, et cetera, operationally, I need to realize that I need to change my method in the implementation of that storage. In other words, if you have somebody come to you and say, I need a 2 terabyte volume, and you look at how they're using it, and they're only using 550 gig or 500 gig, you would allocate 550 gig. You would allocate close enough to actual consumed that as an infrastructure team, you're uncomfortable. And then you have alerting with CloudWatch to alert you when you get to 530 gig, and you go out and you give them another 25 or 30 gig. Now the bill from that FSxN instance is more closely aligned to what I'm actually consuming versus what I'm actually allocating.
It's just the scenario of we have a use case where we have to have our filers on-prem, and but we want a long-term storage to be up in the cloud. So new tech versus old tech, that's interoperable. Yep. Providing the answer is yes. I know we could typically send data all we want up to the cloud, and it's not a heavy cost, but when we want to pull one of those backups back down, taking data out of certain commercial cloud providers is now a pretty penny. So how does that, is there a different relationship set up for costing of moving data in and out when you're doing it for a backup purpose?
Well, so for clarity, FSxN is not a backup environment. Right. Yeah, it says that backup DR, but it is a mountable copy. If you want a protected volume, there is a product called Cloud Backup Service for your on-premises estate that will push a true backup indexed, grandfather, father, son, 3-2-1 scenario, whatever you like, into an S3 bucket. And then the restoration would be very similar to what you're talking about when you start talking about a restoration of the environment. If you're talking about mounting the volume of an FSxN environment and doing a reverse replication of the environment, because I had some corruption in the on-premises environment, that would be the use case for FSxN. I can reverse the sync or reverse the replication. I can even mount it temporarily to the end users. If that doesn't allow for you guys, then what you would be doing from your FSxN instance to your on-premises estate is doing a reverse sync. It is thin. So, you're only going to necessarily get the change blocks. If it's a complete restore, I need to get all of them, then that would be not only time consuming, but yes, you are egressing data out of a cloud provider, and the egress charges would be maintained. I mean, you're pulling data out. So from a use case perspective, a lot of interesting things, right? I can do DR, disaster recovery. I can use it as a backup. Again, from a SnapMirror perspective, technically it doesn't have an index, so it's not really truly a backup, but you can use it for a restoration, a point of restoration. And so in that vernacular, it is a backup. We're splitting hairs there. I can use it for cloud bursting. I can make a replication of the environment, and then I can actually spin up EC2 compute in my AWS VPC to do analytics against the environment or something like that. I can use it for caching. We've talked about flex cache. I can use it as either the source or the destination cache volume. I can do cross-region replication, so I can go from GovCloud East to GovCloud West if I wanted to. By the way, FSxN is FedRAMP moderate, FedRAMP high. So we'll get all the way up to IL5. I want to migrate data into the environment. We talked about snap mirror. So if my on-premises environment or the source data is ONTAP, then I'm going to leverage a snap mirror relationship. If it's something other than ONTAP, I'm going to use things like rsync or AWS Snow family, specifically Snowball, although the Snow family is getting rather large, and I believe that there are some other options there as well, or AWS Data Sync or NetApp Cloud Sync. So a lot of flexibility in how I can get data into the environment. But if my source data is ONTAP, the simple answer is I'm going to use SnapMirror and thin replicate the data after the initial seed. It is a managed service. We talked about that at the first. So from a user's perspective, even the infrastructure team's perspective, this is what I see. I see an IP address, single IP address, happens to be floating in nature. This is going to be representative of a multi-availability zone HA implementation. But as technologists, I want to understand what's behind that gray box. This is, again, an example of a multi-availability zone HA implementation. This exact architecture would happen in a single availability zone because it is HA. So what we would have different is the connection of those blue dotted lines. And it would be representative of a single HA implementation. Again, still HA, and everything below it is still exactly the same. It just all happens within one. So let's walk through this architecture. This is representative of an FSxN instance in a region. The region is represented by the dark solid line on the outside. And within region, if I have at least 3 availability zones, I can implement FSxN. Kudos to US West 1, the San Francisco region, finally getting FSxN because they finally got a 3rd availability zone. But what we have is a storage processor. I'm going to use on-premises words, by the way. I'm going to have a storage processor in an availability zone. This is analogous to a data center. So I have an AZ, so I have SPA and AZ1. The AZ is represented by the blue dashed lines. Associated, assigned, affiliated with that storage processor A in availability zone 1, I have a whole bunch of disks. Specifically, their EBS volumes. I believe that they're specifically GP3 EBS volumes. That's associated with those disks. Okay. I do the exact same thing in the second availability zone. So in availability zone 2, I have another storage processor or storage controller. So I have SPB in AZ2. The difference in this frame implementation versus your on-premises is in availability zone 2, technically a second data center. I have a whole bunch of disks assigned to that as well. So you'll notice that a multi-availability zone HA has 2 data centers involved with 2 storage controllers and their own copy of the data, kept in sync with one another via that replication relationship at the bottom. Okay, this is a quasi-frame-based architecture. Traditionally, a frame-based architecture, 2 storage controllers in an on-premises world that is physically cabled to the same set of disks. Here, each storage controller in a different data center is physically cabled to, not physically, but you get the idea, is physically assigned a set of disks, and each one of them has a copy of the data. This potentially allows you to withstand an availability zone going offline. I say potentially. If it's a standard file system with the floating IP address and it's just a straight up NFS mount point or SMB mount point, the users would never know that I had a failure of an availability zone because the floating IP address for that FSxN instance would move from AZ1 to AZ2. Okay, with no interaction, no need to stick your fingers in there and make a manual change, etc. Right. If there's an application involved, then I have to stress that word potential again, because you would have to do something to make that application be aware that I have a failure in AZ1 and I need to have the application available to me and be able to fail over the users from AZ1 to AZ2 with something like a load balancer. Okay, so the potential exists. to have that if you do the work on the application side. FSxN can become the storage, an NFS data store for your VM implementation if you're leveraging the VMC. Slide's a little bit old. Item number 7, that VTGW, that virtual transit gateway inside of the VMC, can go away now. You can still use it if you want to, but it can go away now, and I can do VPC sharing. Okay. But what I'm going to have is my compute implementation inside of the VMC, and the vSAN storage for the operating system volumes, and an NFS-mounted data store that is FSxN. I can replicate from my vCenter implementation on premises to my VMC vCenter, that NFS data store, from ONTAP to ONTAP. And if I had a failure of the on-premises environment, I can use something like SRM to move my resources in their entirety from one vCenter to the other vCenter, leveraging the SRM type of functionality. Okay. I think we have a couple more. I think there's some references as far as government agencies that are using FSxN. Yeah, so we just talked about this one. Kind of gives you a little bit more simplified view of that implementation, of how I'm going to leverage a replication from my on-premises ONTAP instances on the right there in the corporate data center, leveraging SnapMirror to my FSxN instance, through to that is then made available to the VMC compute. Okay, that's it.
All right, so my name's Alan Eckert. I'm the solutions engineer that works with Chris Glidden for NetApp, and also Don Zimmerman, that you would know. I support the Marine Corps and then DoD agencies. So what Jerry pulled up is NetApp's Cloud Manager, and it has quite a bit of capability that we won't go over today. We'll keep it with what we've done with AWS and Insight in this environment. So Jerry and I have been working on building out a lab environment within the QCH. And this lab environment has a few different areas. So we have a tactical edge system in the other room that is running NetApp ONTAP Select. We have an FSxN environment hosted by AWS. And we have an A400, which is like a core data center system that's outside in the shipping container data center that QCH has set up.
Tier 3 data center.
Sorry?
Tier 3 data center.
Thanks, Robin. So what this kind of is working on displaying is NetApp story for edge to core to cloud. So we have our edge systems, we have our core data center systems, and we have our cloud systems. The lines represent replication that Jerry and I have set up. So basically, what this tactical edge system is hosting is a small VMware environment with a couple of VMs that are hosting different Windows and Linux applications. We have those LUNs that are supporting those applications being backed up to the FSxN environment. And Jeff mentioned FSxN isn't really designed for backup. The reason that we've done it this way, that we set it up, is an initial demonstration of how we can get these volumes replicating data from one to another. But theoretically speaking, we can start hosting full-scale applications on this in this FSxN environment and back them up to our on-prem environment. Or with this tactical edge system, if you were to take this into the field in a real use case scenario with at least the Marine Corps, they would be using this system to ingest data, maybe in the field at the tactical edge. They'd be using this system to host their own applications out in the field, and you can use that system to then replicate data back to a core data center that's closer to the edge, and then back up into the cloud. So the FSxN environment right now is just hosting backup LUNs and volumes from the core data center system and the tactical edge system that we have running. But Jerry and I plan on building this out to quite a bit more capability, and eventually also leverage the Amazon S3 environment for tiering, like Jeff mentioned earlier on the call. So if you want to go to this is the view of our data replication strategy that Jerry and I have set up. It just shows you how much data is moved, what time it's moved, which volume it's coming from, and where it's going. So you can see if there's any issues with your data replication. You can see if there's how much data you're moving, how much new data is being transmitted. Because it's only transmitting. We're snap mirroring in the NetApp language changed blocks. So these are the ones that we have set up so far. So it just shows the data we have set up moving from the tactical edge system, where it's going to the either it's that core data center system or our FSXN environment. And yeah, if you want to. Mobility?
Mobility, yeah.
Tiering?
Yep.
So this is another thing that Jeff kind of talked about a little bit, and that's tiering cold data to the cloud. So within this environment, you can see how much data is actively being used and what is not. So with the environment that we have set up, there's 1.64 terabytes that's considered cold data. We're not being actively accessed through an application or end user. And this data can then be tiered to an object store like AWS S3 to save on your on-premise footprint. So, for example, if you're running an application and you have an A400 populated with solid-state drives, and instead of saying, hey, we've hit that 80% point of our on-premise system, we need to buy another shelf, or you can see, maybe you're only using 50% of that SSD and the rest is considered cold data. So instead of purchasing another shelf or expanding your on-premise environment, you can tier to an object store like AWS S3 and save your on-premise footprint. And it's pretty easy to set up. Obviously, this isn't real flashy. There's not a lot to necessarily show or demonstrate in an active way, but it's more of just a dashboard and a show point on how you can manage your data essentially anywhere. So that's kind of, I guess, what we're working on initially and what Jerry and I plan on doing, at least in the next few months. Next being setting up applications in the FSXN environment and eventually hosting multiple production environments that are leveraging the edge systems, the core systems, and the cloud systems.
And showing how we can snap mirror that data to a different region, right? So in the case of the tactical edge, it doesn't matter what region that data is being mirrored to, we can send it off somewhere else. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Sorry?
So having that tactical edge go into a region, like we were saying in New Orleans versus one that's in Northern Virginia?
Right. So, for example, if you have an application where users are accessing the same data and the same application, let's say like in one region like US East versus maybe a core data center in New Orleans, you can mirror that data. And this comes down more to network and how far away these environments are and how you want to configure it from a technical sense. But instead of saying snap mirroring changed blocks and a backup, you can mirror these volumes from one data center to another data center or in a cloud environment from one region to another. So all users have access to that same data no matter where they are. Jeff talked a little bit about this also with the flex caching and edge caching, and with that integrated capability, if you have a user in Tokyo that is accessing the same shift share as another user in San Francisco, depending on where it's hosted, those users can cache that data locally and access that same data without having to deal with the latency that would occur from accessing a data center, 7,000 miles away or whatever the case.
Does the cold storage, where it shows their cold data, does it break it down more granularly so you can kind of figure out exactly what it is?
What data you're looking at?
Yeah.
So I don't think you can from the BlueXP dashboard. I'm not sure how you would actually view that cold data from a files perspective. Jeff, I'm not sure if you heard that question or if you know the answer to that, but I'm not familiar with the way to actually view a granular layout or printout or display of the cold data that NetApp defines as what it's defined as. Do you know? Yeah. So I'll look into that.
Yeah. Just for context, we're having a conversation before with
No, it's a great question. Yeah.
AWS about low-hanging fruit, right? It's
Right.
like, we can break that down. That gives us a target list.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
What you want to know is, like, what's made up of that cold?
Yeah.
Right.
What is that?
Where's it from?
Yeah. He wants. Yeah. Yeah. I'll
The
see.
data owners can make a decision, is this really something I want to put in
Yeah.
cold storage versus no?
And a target list for us of, hey, this is all the cold data that's easy sell to get pushed into the cloud.
Right.
No, great question. I'll look into how that capability is possible.
Is that a manual process to put it in cold storage, or can you set it up for automatic?
You can set it up to automatic. Yeah. Yeah. You can set it up to tier cold data.
After
Absolutely.
so many days of being untouched or something,
Right.
you could
Yeah.
take it off.
Absolutely.
I'm sure the flexibility of that is somewhat endless. I mean, you put all kinds of policies and rules into when and how it moves.
Yeah.
If somebody requested how he move it back, et cetera.
Yeah. So I mean, we won't go into it today, but there's a lot of different ways to move data, right? We say backup, and I say replicate, and I say mirror, but I mean, there's probably a dozen different ways that you can work with beyond just a backup strategy, but define where data is and how long it's there, right?
And you can build lots of policies around that data, and what you want to do with it, and what actions you want to take on it when they meet that criteria.
Doing it mainly for a cost savings perspective of what's being utilized and how costly it is to data
Yeah.
that shouldn't be on there.
Right. Yeah. So they mentioned egress charges before, and Jeff hit on that a little bit also. But if it's data that you don't plan on requiring anytime soon, I was speaking to Aaron earlier, like an archive example. If you're archiving data for so many years based on some GDPR or DoD compliance strategy, then a good use case would be potentially moving that data to like an S3 object store instead of keeping it on-prem while it sits there on probably SSD now, considering what everyone's kind of moving towards as far as on-premise data strategies. So moving data that you're retaining for compliance purposes is a perfect use case for tiering something to S3, and not tiering in a cold data strategy way, but tiering data from a policy compliance.
In your scenario with the cloud instance, the on-prem, and then the tactical edge,
Right.
all communicating, what's the security protocol? Like, what ports of protocols are they communicating over? Is it like a VPN?
So the way the data is moving, it uses something called SnapMirror, which is NetApp's technology that uses, God, I don't know the port off the top of my head, but like port 23 or whatever, right? So it just uses, I mean, it's not really 23, but it uses a port that NetApp opens up between communication between one ONTAP instance to another ONTAP instance.
And it's a network layer transport, so you can build the controls and protocols in between that instead of stand up VPNs and do it however, you'd have to
Right,
do that data
or a
for
tunnel or whatever the case.
We make our own security and then it just
Exactly.
provides that port.
And then we
Right.
run through that port.
run through, yeah.
Yeah, but the technology is called NetApp SnapMirror, is how the data is actually moving from point A to point B. We're one ONTAP system to another ONTAP system.
So, separate from other use cases we discussed earlier, one of the things we're looking at is we've got the application in GovWest, and we're kicking around the idea of a data coop in GovEast.
Right.
So we're high availability in West, we're good there, just want to ship the data over and, be certain there. Can you talk more about the cross-regional hearing there, and what would a kind of strategy look like to implement something like that?
So a full DR coop, so like a hot site essentially in the cloud?
Bringing up the application, just saving all the data, terabytes of data, hundreds of terabytes of data separately. We would eventually bring the application back up and then, you know, ensure that we have that pristine copy we pull back.
So yeah, essentially that would function the same way that any of these other strategies would function. It just depends on, when I say that there's 12 different, data protection, DR, and different strategies to move data, that's from a licensing perspective and how, so synchronous copies are obviously much more intensive than asynchronous. So from a NetApp's perspective, there's different licensing that's required for different ways to move data and different ways to store data. But from a technology's perspective, it comes down to basically asynchronous or synchronous mirroring or backup and recovery. So in your case, if it's not a hot COOP site and you just want to copy data from one region to the other, it would work the same way that any of these other strategies work with SnapMirror. Just depends on the policy.
Alan, you were throwing a question my way when I lost power. So.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Storms around here. So what was the question?
Yeah, so with the data tiering, can you hear me?
Yeah, come a little closer.
Yep.
So with data tiering, we had a question on how you can view the cold data that NetApp determines to be, not being used or be cold. Is there a way to granularly drill down into all those blocks that NetApp describes as cold before they move, so you can make a determination on what it's classifying and if you think it should move to S3 or not?
Yeah, no, there isn't. So there's 3 policies on tiering, whether it's cloud tiering or whether it's FSXN tiering. And those 3 policies, there's actually 4 because one of the policies is none. But the 3 policies are snapshot only. Obviously self-explanatory. It'll move the snapshot of a volume to the capacity pool or the S3 associated S3 bucket in the event of an on-premises environment. And by the way, cloud tiering can tier in an on-premises world to storage grid or can push through out to a cloud-provided associated S3 bucket. The second policy is all, again, self-explanatory. The index is always maintained in the SSD space, but every other block of data, by the way, it's a 4K block, would move to the associated S3 bucket or the object store. Technically speaking, what happens is those 4K blocks are concatenated into 4 meg chunks, and those 4 meg chunks are then moved down to or over to the object store. And the third policy is an auto policy. Auto policy is deterministic by access time, meaning, and it's a tunable value. So you can tune it from 3 days to 183 days, actually 2 days. 2 days to 183 days. And if a block hasn't been accessed in the prescribed time, it would move down to the associated S3 bucket. If it's referenced, if a block is referenced, again, 4K block instead of a 4 meg chunk, if that block is referenced, it is referenced out of the index. The index, again, maintained in SSD. It would give it an object identifier. The object identifier, 4 meg in size, has a whole bunch of 4K blocks inside of it. It wouldn't necessarily bring back the 4 meg chunk. It would only grab the required 4K object out of that 4 meg chunk. You can run reports from a CLI perspective. I'm actually taking advantage of storage efficiency. They don't even exist in native storage. You're just now getting things like compression in native storage, in native storage, in EBS, EFS, Azure Managed Disk, GCP, GCS disks, etc. You're just now getting that. Those have been table stakes for you for 15 plus years in your on-premises data. Realizing that again, changes the economics with FSXN because now I don't have to allocate full 2 terabytes on the 2 terabyte volume because I can then provision, right? The ability to mitigate ransomware with virus scan and F policy, and snapshotting, right, on the security and compliance. Right. So, snap lock. I can snap lock an environment, making it immutable. You can't do that. Any of these things that I'm talking about, you can't do. Consistency of performance. 160,000 IOPS, yeah, there's some storage out there that'll go faster, like for example, FSX for Luster. It'll go faster, but it won't do it consistently. Right? So all of those things are, and by the way, I believe, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys have a rather extensive investment of on-premises ONTAP, and I would hope that you have a relatively extensive process of automation via the CLI, the ONTAP CLI, or the ONTAP API. That all of that automation can just be lifted and dropped.
And so then,
So the learning curve is zero, and the realization of dollars saved can be big.
so then could you, maybe speak to how could NetApp fill the role of, within like, data fabric or data layer, how it can fill the role of that data storage, component? Like, we're getting ready to, right now we've got, this is BDP in play, and we're getting ready to do something different besides BDP, and this could certainly be a part of that AOA that we're going to be accomplishing for the larger data layer. We just would need to know more about how it can integrate with everything, and from a tagging governance perspective, how NetApp could pull in and be part of that larger data fabric, I guess.
So,
You want me to take that one? Or down, you got it.
yeah, well, go ahead, Jeff. Your answers have been verbose.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, sorry. You broke up about that time. So at the end of the day, you talk about, the data layer. I'm assuming you're talking about kind of a combination or a culmination of data into somewhat of a data lake use model. Obviously, you have lots of ingest points into an on-top implementation, in this case, FSXN. You can, again, accessibility out to a 2 petabyte file system gives you consistency of access. I don't have to necessarily concatenate or have a disk manager in front of it to make use of quite a bit of space. In a traditional NFS mount point, for example, certainly if you ship to an object store with S3, and that goes out the window, but most analytics engines don't natively talk S3 yet. I think that's probably coming, but it's not there yet. So certainly consolidation of ingest points into a singular data lake is something that ONTAP's been doing for, a long time, greater than a decade for sure. From a governance perspective, the slide that didn't translate very well had a specific call out to governance, and there are two fronts in that one. There's something called Cloud Secure, and there's something called Cloud Data Sense. Those will do behavioral analytics against access methods. So, for instance, Jeff comes in never at 2 a.m. and accesses a whole bunch of files. Well, Cloud Data Sense suddenly sees Jeff coming in at 2 a.m. and accessing a whole bunch of files. It's going to say, well, that's anomalous behavior, and because that's anomalous behavior, I'm actually going to take action against that. And the action is I'm going to take a snapshot and cut off his access. Right, so just within a few seconds, it's realizing that there's an anomalous behavior event happening from inside, from a user inside, me, and taking action against that. So that ransomware event that's timed because I clicked on a link 30 days ago, I've mitigated, I've taken a snapshot, and I've cut off access. And because I can do things like 1,000 snapshots per volume, I can figure out, potentially I can go back far enough to get rid of that Jeff clicking a link. Cloud Secure also gives you some visibility and reporting into the use case, how it's being accessed, and can give you reports, things like SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA. There's some specific governmental ones that don't really have a name, like the 1732 or something like that, GDPR type of reports, right? So they can kind of help you have visibility into those things. Did that answer your question? Your reference to the combination of data was a little bit nebulous, and so I want to make sure that I covered what you wanted.
It's nebulous in my brain as well. Yeah, I think you did, sir. Thank you.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jeff.
During this slide as well. Can you go back and revisit the ONTAP API? What is the scope of the capability that provides? And I'm coming from the idea of I have an application that is a system of systems all communicating by API. And we had this massive multi-hundred terabyte data archive that would we be able to query it in a performant manner from a custom application?
So my non-Jeff verbose answer is if as long as it's a REST API, right? So, yes.
Yeah, it is a REST-based API on top. Zappy's been deprecated. I'm not sure it's been fully deprecated. I need to keep that can down the road. But it is a REST-based API, so you can do things like, and again, your example doesn't necessarily fit this one, but this one kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what you can do with it. I've got a MySQL database, and so inside of the MySQL database, I can script the quiesce of that database, a freeze of the transactions in flight. I can make a call of the REST-based API, pass the user ID, pass the authentication, and pass a command to take a snapshot of the environment, and then unfreeze that. All of that can happen outside of the MySQL tool set so that I can create a consistent point-in-time copy that is application-aware, leveraging tools outside of FSXN or ONTAP, because I'm making a reference to the ONTAP API, right? That's workflow that would kind of give you that example of consistency and data integrity outside of an ONTAP management environment, making use of it through something else.
Perfect.
Did that help or not?
Yeah, beautiful answer. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. You guys are chuckling and I can't see you, so I don't know what you're chuckling about.
I think they're just laughing at me, but you know.
Oh, good. Good. You're tired of my verbose answers?
No, I love them.
We like your book.
Cool. How's everyone doing? Good? Nice and fed? Awesome. My name is Mike Tell. I am an AWS pre-sales solutions consultant here at Insight. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about Insight's capabilities, who we are, what we've done before, some use cases. Keep it short and sweet so we can go on and move on with our day. So who is Insight? A leading solutions integrator. We drive speed, scale, resilience, and innovation to our clients across the globe, combining our technical expertise, broad solutions portfolio, and supply chain capabilities to help businesses achieve their ambitious goals. That is a very marketing answer. But at the end of the day, we are a solutions integrator. We do a lot of different things across the company. Hardware refreshes on data centers, cloud, procurement, you name it, Insight does it. We got 13,000 teammates worldwide, 5,700 skilled certified consulting and service delivery professionals. So we have a huge bench. And we are a Fortune 500 company at number 379, last I checked. So as far as how it pertains to AWS, we are an advanced services partner with AWS, which is the middle tier. We are very close to achieving our premier tier status with AWS, which only a handful of organizations have across the globe. And we look to have that by the beginning early next year. So that's something we're really excited about. And that just shows to prove, our expertise in the world of AWS. We're a public sector partner. We work hand in hand with the public sector, various government agencies, cities, you name it. Marketplace, we are a skilled consulting partner. We're part of the Solution Provider Program. We're ProServe ready. And we're also part of the well-architected partner program.
We got a bunch of competencies as well, specifically to AWS, AWS security, migrations, which I'll talk about here in a little bit in some of the use cases, Microsoft workloads, and specifically with Amazon EC2. So we have a lot of badged architects on staff when it comes to AWS. We have all sorts of solutions architects, from associate and professional, sysops administrators, certified developers, DevOps engineers, professional level, security specialties, advanced networking, again, well architected, specifically badged there for some of the employees that we have. So wide knowledge around AWS, depending on what you're looking to get into. We've got you covered, and we've all passed those tests. So as far as insight by the numbers around AWS in the cloud, we got 4,500 engineers and field consultants. We deliver over 1,500 projects every year, 25 plus years of data center experience. We consulted on thousands of projects. We manage services clients on 6 continents. Moved tons of data, as you can see, greater exabyte, 1 exabyte, and 2 million workloads since 2015. So we do this stuff a lot. So some of the key service areas I want to talk about when it comes to AWS are these 6 right here. And these are our core pillars that we really like to focus on when it comes to Amazon Web Services. Cost optimization, cloud security, migration, cloud economics assessments, infrastructure assessments, and storage and backup. Cost optimization, we see all day, every day. As you know, getting to the cloud is great. It's even better when it's optimized. Cloud security, migration, again, is huge with this big push to get to the cloud, and AWS in particular. There's a lot of things that go into that. Cloud economics, we have an entire team dedicated to understanding your licensing that you have on premise, what it would look like in AWS, what can you bring, what is included with AWS, all sorts of things, so you know exactly what you're getting into when you get to that point. Storage and backup, NetApp, obviously, talked a lot about that stuff already. But again, those are the 6 key areas that we like to focus on. So within Insight and AWS, and the AWS slice of Insight, we have, our entire services bench where we can do custom work for sure. But we also have packaged offerings. Now, these are things that you can go and basically just pick off the shelf, and they're ready to go. We've done them hundreds, if not thousands of times. They're tried and true. Whether it's disaster recovery, backup, and restore, cloud foundations or landing zones. So we got different varying degrees of landing zones there depending on your use case and how you want to start off within the AWS environment. Again, we got security assessments, whether it's for compliance or just general security overall. Migrations, again, dedicated packages for a number of servers, and even migration assessments like MAP, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Outside of the professional services area of Insight, we also have the managed services. So think of our managed services team as an extension of your actual internal team. We want to get integrated. We want to be able to help you guys out and be, those folks that you can rely on and call on when, bandwidth is already tapped out internally. So we use a bunch of different tools when coming to help manage and understand things like Datadog for analytics and understanding what's going on within the environment. 24/7 incident management of the environment, real-time assistance with multiple contact options. So if you have a question or a problem, you can always get on the phone and get a hold of somebody and work through the issue. Case management, ITIL based, so any changes that are done are completely documented, so there's no guesswork. Change and patch management, this comes up all the time. I find a lot of people don't like to really deal with change and patch management because it can be kind of a struggle sometimes, and sometimes it's nice to be able to pass it off to somebody else to just rush it out and get it done. Including all of that, we have formal escalation timeline policies, automated alert notifications, formal action plans that we'll work with you guys on, and make sure you're getting timely status updates for everything that's going on. And like I said, integrated processes so we can, jump right in and become part of your team using Insight. So I wanted to talk about some case studies. We got a couple here. First one I want to talk about is a large West Coast city that manages many departments and bureaus within that umbrella. We've been working with them for a little bit. They've been running workloads in AWS already, but they needed some help with setting up backup from on-premise to AWS. Their existing on-premise solution was becoming very cost prohibitive, and they were looking for a cheaper solution. They also needed help with reserved instances and making sure that they are purchasing the right reserved capacity for what they're using and not getting locked into something that they're not ultimately going to use. This was a process that needed to be done manually, and they really needed help understanding their usage and spend trends because it was kind of scattershot right out the gate when we got involved. So when we got to working with them, we provided a couple different things. So consultation was huge. We sat down with them to really understand their use cases and help them get to where they wanted to be using the best path forward. As far as the on-premise backups to AWS, we ended up going with AWS Storage Gateway to make sure that the data is going where it needs to go, and it's essentially an extension of their on-premise environment. They can quickly access the data and storage that they have on AWS. We provided the engineering support to help set up and optimize the Storage Gateway and their environment overall. And we also, again, helped them with the RI coverage plan to make sure they were getting the biggest bang for their buck and having the most coverage with very little risk. So some of the big benefits with the Storage Gateway and the AWS environment is that it's scalable. It grows as they grow. They're no longer constrained to the hardware that they're using in the data center, completely scalable. A lot easier to manage that way. Lower costs overall for their backups versus what they were doing on-premise, like I mentioned. And through procuring AWS through Insight, they have access to our Insight Cloud Care team, which is a dedicated cloud success manager that meets with them on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to help, identify additional cost savings, bring up, things that might have fallen through the cracks, and just another eye on the environment to make sure things are good. And really, the goal was to help them get streamlined, help provide data-driven decisions when it comes to purchasing additional RIs or savings plans down the road as they continue to grow. And for the second case study here, this one I like a lot because it's actually really gets into a couple different areas, migration being a big one and cost savings. I feel like cost savings is in every initiative that we do. But this client is a large government partner that works with many government agencies. They assist these agencies with implementing programs that can scale rapidly and help modernize and digitally transform their infrastructure. So for this partner, they wanted to essentially migrate 2 data centers to AWS for all of their internal stuff, moving federal applications to GovCloud in AWS. We worked with them previously on a couple different modernization projects, data consolidation, various system upgrades, again, licensing, procurement, that stuff, that kind of thing. And then when we got into it, we helped provide a customized proof of concept for cost optimization services. So we essentially stepped in as the company's main point of contact for licensing, deployment, and support of the AWS environment once we proved with the POC that we are more than capable to do so. As far as the migration goes, we kind of stepped in to perform this 2 data center migration as the second phase of their overall plan. This included a DevOps approach of, those 7 R's again that we heard Nick talk about earlier. Big focus on rehosting, refactoring, and replatforming those applications. And this included migrating licenses. We migrated SQL, Oracle, and other business workloads all over to AWS. And to make the migration even easier, we built a migration automation pipeline using a couple different services, specifically Jenkins automation, Ansible playbooks, and CloudFormation. So if you can automate it, you probably should, because it'll make your life so much easier. You can just repeat it and speed it along. Through this process, due to the size and scope of this AWS environment, we're talking millions of dollars every month, we were able to help procure MAP funding. So we were able to help really drive down the costs of getting into AWS. We also helped them execute an EDP, which is the Enterprise Discount Program, once they were in. So, basically, I have some details here actually. So during this whole process, this partner's environment grew 50x over the course of the year. So it really kind of exploded through just their day-to-day stuff and obviously the migrations. So optimization was paramount. With the MAP credits, we saved them roughly $1.5 million over a 3-year period through those credits. And then the EDP was a 5-year agreement, which provides a 12% flat discount overall on AWS spend. So pretty sizable chunk, especially with the size that they were. On top of that, again, we kind of went in and really dug into what they were using, when they were using it, and really helped build out their reserved instance and savings plan strategy, which again helped them realize another $1.1 million in savings within the first year. So we're already seeing huge chunks of savings just by going through this process. Again, they're part of the Insight Cloud Care program, so we have a dedicated CSM that is working with them weekly to make sure everything's looking good, and helping them identify further opportunities for optimization. They also have access to a tool that we use called Cloud Checker, that actually NetApp owns now, that our CSMs use. And cool thing is, this partner actually invested into this and opened it up to other internal employees. So they have other folks that are completely bought in, using this tool to do cost reporting, some self-optimization, identify potential security configurations, things like that. So all in all, it's a great story, and one we're very excited about, and we're looking to repeat as we continue to grow this AWS business. So that is Insight in a nutshell, and I think I'm just ahead of the 1 o'clock. So any questions around Insight, anything I can help provide some context on when it comes to that?
Back on slide, I think it was 37. Can you define what you said AWS Cloud Foundations, you called that like a landing zone?
Correct.
Define what an advanced landing zone is?
I don't have the details right in front of me. It really gets into some of the networking aspects and the firewalls, like if you're using like layer 7, specific firewalls for, I think the advanced has a bunch of that stuff.
It's just be a CCSRG compliant security stack to kind of get you going on that route of having your own APO output.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Would this be a CCSRG compliant security stack enclave that would kind of be starting you down that route, or am I thinking it of something else?
I don't know if we necessarily for that.
Typically, we do a lot of work with Amazon and Google and Azure and building, onboarding sessions and landing zones to automate the process. And we've done it a lot in the commercial sector. I don't think so much in the federal sector, but we're starting to have those conversations, and we could certainly have a conversation with the team that does that and you guys, and then we can kind of figure out, you know, where to go from there if it makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely something we can do. As far as the package services go, I don't think they were designed with that specifically in mind.
You mentioned what we should be premier partner by early next year.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any tangible advantages that come with that?
Yeah, additional funding mechanisms, if I'm not mistaken. We just have more access to resources within AWS, things like that. So, yeah, good question.
So is the only way to get to you through the AWS assistance hours? I guess, are there any vehicles that you guys are a part of, GSA or FedSim, that allow us to allow customers to?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so I'm not on that side as well. There's something. Then you're with?
DCSA.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
Brady's working with them, Robin.
Pardon?
Brady, Hilliard.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, he gave me a heads up. So that's a good conversation. Currently, we have the GSA, a GSA schedule that we have mapped our services against. For some Navy customers, we figured out how to do like a U.S. citizen, U.S. soil call center to support the Azure environment for them. So that's not the best vehicle, but that is one that we can currently use. And there's some others that are, like, are you familiar with a CSO, Commercial Solutions offering? So if you're trying to prototype something or pilot something, there's a way to do a contract using that as a vehicle that you can go from prototype to pilot into production. And and there's a couple others kind of kicking around. Those two come to top of mind there, but kind of depending on what it is you're trying to do, we could figure something out. And I work with Brady. Yeah, I mean, he's a DoD sales guy. I'll give him my card as well. And are you guys right here?
Well,
Local or?
Sort of. We're at RKD and also at Hanover.
Oh, okay, yeah, so you did a hike test. Okay. And that's kind of what we do at the QCH, try to figure out those kinds of use cases. How can we put something together and then figure out what the acquisition path is for that? But there's a lot of fact finding that goes on the front end of that.
Sure. Yeah, we've got a couple of items that we're going to have to come up with an acquisition strategy for. So,
yeah, I can work with Brady on that, help figure that out.
Yeah, I think the plan is to do a deeper dive session similar to this, right? Just high-level overview for a wider audience, but something specific to your situation.
Right. We do a lot of these kind of like a deep dive, where we can take one or two customers at a time and just figure out specifically what it is you're trying to do.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys.